Mm. Yeah, baby. When you hear the legendary sounds of Jimi Hendrix, you know only one thing is coming up next. That's right. The Voodoo Child is back in the building. We got week two. A lot of great games during week one, week zero. Had a few upsets. Vanderbilt Commodores. We are looking at you live, as my good friend Brent Musburger would like to say. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not going to waste any time. Let's get into these five matchups because I think we got an interesting slate of games to talk about. And up first is the matchup between UTSA and Texas State. Now, why did I choose this game? I thought all along that that line was completely wrong. I thought the wrong team was favored in this ball game. So, as you heard, Billy did a fantastic job saying that in the lead up, Texas State opened as a slight home favorite in this ball game. That's not the way that we saw it here. Fantastic job there by Billy helping, you know, helping us set that line out. We had UTSA as a 2 point road favorite in this ball game. And if you're paying attention to the betting market, that number is starting to come our way. So we were already ahead of that and hopefully was able to get the best number in that. So let's take a look at this matchup because I don't think we can really rely on what we saw in week one from both of these teams to really give us an indicator of this matchup. For Texas State, a very close win at home last week against Lamar, 34-27. Put up some nice rushing stats in that ball game, but like I said, not a lot to not a lot of meat on that bone. UTSA comes into this matchup also 1-0. A win over Kennesaw State. This is their second year in Division One, making the step up from the FCS ranks. So not a whole lot to really delve into from that standpoint. But here's what we did learn. The quarterback for UTSA, Owen McCown, I'm sorry, 6'1", 200, right around 200 pounds, sophomore out of Rusk, Texas. Had a very solid game in that opening matchup. 3 touchdowns, no INTs. If you're a quarterback, I love to see that touchdown to INT ratio. 8.9 yards per attempt in that matchup. A little bit below the threshold that we like to see, but that's okay. Completed almost 74% of his passes, threw for 340 yards. For Texas State, they really leaned on the ground game last week. You're talking about a team that going up against an FCS opponent, and as I just kind of take a look at my notes here, 41 rush attempts, over 200 yards rushing, 5.2 yards per attempt. Folks, that's where this game is going to be won and lost for me in this matchup. Can UTSA kind of handle that running game for Texas State? Now, looking at our projections, we're projecting Texas State to have about 166 yards rushing in this matchup. However, we're expecting an even bigger performance on the rushing production out of UTSA. We're expecting them to be probably in that 185-yard range. So if UTSA can get out to an early lead and really force Texas State to have to throw the ball, we'll find out if Texas State is able to keep pace in this matchup. I think it's going to be a fantastic game. Looking forward to seeing that outcome. Now, the next four games we're going to spend a little bit more time on because those are some of our primetime matchups here. And we're going to go to the Cyhawk game. Love that this is a rivalry game, even though these two teams aren't conference rivals. But you get this game very early on in the season, usually around week 2 or week 3 at the latest. We usually get this annual matchup. So fantastic job there by both universities in giving us this matchup. Once again, did not learn a lot from these teams last week. Folks, don't be fooled by that score last week with Iowa and Iowa State. Um, that game was 6-0 at halftime. Iowa was able to take advantage of some really good field position and convert those into points, scoring 34 second half points there. Game still went under for all of you that were interested in that ball game. So we really don't extrapolate a lot from that ball game, but here's what we did take away from it. Quarterback Cade McNamara looked really healthy in that ball game. You saw a smaller knee brace for the senior quarterback out of Reno, Nevada. 3 touchdowns, no INTs. I'm going to keep harping on those numbers for quarterbacks. Touchdown to INT ratio. Average yard per attempt, 6.1. Not a lot of shots down the field, but he took care of the ball. Completed right around 68% of his attempts last week. Want to see if he's able to duplicate that this week. As far as their opponents this week, the Iowa State Cyclones, a very hard-fought win against North Dakota last week, winning that matchup 21-3. And quarterback Rocco Beck in that ball game. Solid performance is what we're going to call it. 2 touchdowns, no INTs, 10.3 yards per attempt. Now, that's something that gets my notice for the sophomore there out of West Chapel, Florida. Completed about 77% of his passes for looks like about 267 yards. Want to take a look at some of the stats in that ball game for Iowa State, because it's a little bit concerning here for me. Now, their defense allowed North Dakota State to convert 11 out of 20 attempts on third down. That's not good if you're going into a matchup with the Iowa Hawkeyes. Here's another number that's really concerning for me. Going up against North Dakota, the Hawkeyes rush attempts, 22 rush attempts in that ball game, only 86 yards rushing, 3.9 yards per attempt. Folks, they're going up against one of the best defensive minds in all of college football in one Phil Parker. I've said pound for pound, probably the best defensive coordinator in college football. That's no disrespect to Ohio State's defensive coordinator, Jim Knowles, who I told Buckeye fans a couple of years ago when he left Oklahoma State, you were getting an absolute coaching upgrade on that side of the ball. No disrespect to Georgia's defensive coordinator, Glenn Schumann. Fantastic job there. What Phil Parker is working with is far less projected NFL talent than either one of those two ball clubs. So I just respect the work that this defensive coordinator puts in. And when I look at some of our advanced numbers here, like I said, not a lot of great information, but enough to where we can make some projections here. Want to take a look at how that Iowa defense, as far as rushing goes, matches up favorably with this Iowa State offense. We're projecting Iowa State to have right around, let's call it right around 90, maybe 90 yards rushing in this ball game. If they can't get to that number, folks, their chances of winning are going to be extremely slim in this ball game. Because what I would like to see continue from the new offensive coordinator there at the Iowa Hawkeyes. If you're able to get Cade McNamara off to an early start, now you can really force the Iowa Hawkeyes to play your style of game now, where you take away any threat of the run from Iowa State, and now you're forcing them to throw the ball pretty much throughout the rest of the game. I think you're going to see a defensive clinic put on here by Iowa in this ball game. Now, one of the targets that they absolutely must stop in this ball game for the Cyclones, wide receiver Jalen Noel. Where's number 13? 5'11", 200-pound senior out of Kansas City, Missouri. Last week had a really phenomenal game against North Dakota. 8 receptions, 135 yards, 17 yards per catch, 1 touchdown. Did have a long reception of 54 yards. Now, I don't expect him to get behind this Iowa secondary because they are so fundamentally sound, but if he's able to help keep the chains moving, keep that pressure off of Rocco Beck, could be in tune for some really good production there. I'm going to note somebody off of the Iowa side of the ball, and that's running back Caleb Johnson. 6 foot, 225-pound sledgehammer out of Hamilton, Ohio. Kind of familiar with that area there in Ohio. Last week, the young man had 11 carries, 119 yards, almost 11 yards per pop. 2 touchdowns, did have that long run of 64 yards. If I was able to control the offensive line and use this sledgehammer of a running back consistently in this ball game, could be in store for a really fantastic ball game. Up next, let's head over to beautiful Charlotte, North Carolina. I want to say hello to a very dear friend of mine that's listening to this podcast, Julie Balls. Her and my good friend Matlock host a weekly show. They're in the beautiful Emerald Coast down there in Florida. And Julie, I'm going to love breaking down your Vols versus NC State in this matchup. So, Matlock, let's get into it, my friend. So, what did we really take away from that game last week with Tennessee and Charlotte? I'm sorry, Tennessee and Chattanooga there in Knoxville. Nico looked the part of the starting quarterback as they absolutely ran Chattanooga out the building 69-3. I'm not really concerned about Nico's stats in that ball game as he only played the first half. Went 22 for 28, 314 yards, 3 touchdowns. Here's what I did like about his performance. It was the ball placement to his wide receivers. I don't care if the wide receivers were getting separation. He was putting the ball exactly where he needed to be, to where his wide receivers could actually turn up field and get yards after the catch. And you can see that with his average last week. 11.2 yards per attempt. We talked about it. 3 touchdowns, no INTs. But what I liked is that yards per attempt. This young man out of Long Beach, California, looked the part as a starting quarterback for the University of Tennessee there. As far as NC State last week, watching them play a very, very tight ball game against Western Carolina. That final score was 38-21. But as we look at that, Western Carolina had to lead at the end of the first quarter, 14-7. That game was tied at the half. It wasn't until really the fourth quarter where NC State pulls away and scored 21 points there in the final period there. Were the Wolfpack looking ahead to next week? That's something to be concerned about. Let's take a look inside of their numbers last week to see if there's anything that we should be concerned with. Solid on third down. They went 7 for 13, so a tick over 50% there. We like that. Solid job against Western Carolina. They went 5 for 13. Here's where, if I am NC State, I'm really concerned in this matchup. Western Carolina had 19 rush attempts, went for a buck 20. Folks, that is 6.3 yards per attempt. Can I share something with you about Josh Heupel? As much as people like to think that he's going to just chuck it around the yard, that's not what this guy's offensive mindset is. He wants to spread you out, and then if he can pound the rock with a lighter box, and a light box is 7 or less within that small area away from the line of scrimmage. If NC State cannot control that portion of the field, we could be in for some fireworks there for the University of Tennessee. So, Julie Valves, have Rocky Top standing by, as you may be hearing that a few times on Saturday night. Now, what does NC State absolutely have to do in this ball game? They're going to have to run the ball and run it effectively against this Tennessee defensive front. Last week, 33 rush attempts, 204 yards, 6.2 yards per rush attempt. If you want to keep a high-powered offense from scoring, you keep them absolutely on the bench. How do you do that? You convert on third downs. You're able to extend drives and run the ball very efficiently and effectively in this matchup. If NC State cannot run the ball in this matchup, and they're giving Tennessee a full complement of drives in this ball game, and when I say full complement of drives in a game, typically once we get to about 10 or 11 drives, that's a full complement. You want to shorten the game, like Florida State had happened to them in week 0 against Georgia Tech. You want to limit Tennessee to about 8 possessions in this ball game if you're NC State. If that drive count gets up to 9, 10, 11, or 12, that's telling me that NC State is not having a lot of success keeping the ball on offense, giving Tennessee those extra possessions. And folks, if that dam starts to break, Tennessee has no problem with putting up big-time scores in this ball game. Let's take a look at those rushing projections for this contest. And we're projecting the Tennessee Vols offense to hit about 158 yards rushing in this contest. That would not spell good for NC State, because our model has NC State rushing for about 115 yards in this matchup. When you look at the passing attack, if Tennessee's able to get Nico going, it's not about the yards. It's about managing the offense, I should say. Picking up third downs, either with his arm or his legs, getting off to an early lead. I believe if Tennessee is able to get off to a 10, 14-point lead in the first half, you're going to see Josh Heupel absolutely start to eat away at that clock. And can NC State keep up? Something that I'm going to be paying attention to from a scouting standpoint is, how does Tennessee scheme up to where they can get a wide receiver matched up on either a linebacker or a safety. Think back 2 years ago when they finally were able to get over the hump against Alabama there in Knoxville. What did they consistently do? They were able to get those favorable matchups where in this ball game, I'm going to look at Squirrel White. If he's able to get freed up on especially one of those inside linebackers or safety that doesn't get over quick enough, you could see a big play for the Tennessee Vols in this contest. For NC State, it's going to come down to the wide receiver Concepcion. Can he put up another big time matchup performance in this ball game? Now we know what he did last weekend: 9 receptions, 121 yards, and 3 touchdowns. He's going to have to be Grayson McCall's number one target, and Tennessee's got to find a way to take him away in this contest. Folks, we got two fantastic matchups coming up next. We have, oh boy, the Colorado Buffaloes taking on the Nebraska Cornhuskers. And this was a matchup that really teased us last year. We remember Colorado coming off that big opening weekend win against TCU. Came home and found the Nebraska Cornhuskers waiting in the wings. And it was an absolute sneak attack by Colorado last year as they were able to really take advantage of the speed matchup that they had at the wide receiver spot. Shedeur Sanders had a really good game in that matchup last year. And we'll see if he's able to replicate that this year. We'll get into the matchup here in just a moment. Nebraska, and I'm sorry, last week, a really hard-fought win against North Dakota State, 31-26. Some questionable play calling decisions there by Coach Prime. We know that Colorado cannot run the ball. Okay, they just have an inability to run the ball. And last week we saw no improvement of that. Now, here's what we did see. Their rush defense hasn't gotten any better either. So let's look at Colorado's offense, rush production in that ballgame. 23 attempts, 59 total yards rushing. That's 2.6 yards per rush attempt. Not going to get it done. North Dakota State, 43 rush attempts, 157 yards. Yes, 3.7 yards per attempt, but it's the 43 attempts that would concern me if I'm a fan of Colorado. Another thing that would absolutely concern me if I was a Colorado Buffalo supporter in this ball game, 11.2 yards per attempt is what you gave up to North Dakota State last week. 20 for 26, 292 yards. Ooh, that's not good. You couldn't get off the field on third downs. North Dakota State went 7 for 13 in that matchup on third down. And not good. What was good for Colorado? Shedeur Sanders. This young man is trying to stake a claim to be the number one pick in the draft next April. In his opening stanza this year, 26 for 34, 445 yards passing, 13.1 yards per attempt. 7 for 11 on third downs. Now, you do like that. And I noted this. You did see Colorado knock off some of the penalties from what they were last year. I think they were averaging about 8 penalties per game last year, maybe even a little bit higher. Only 3 penalties in this ball game. So there were no personal fouls. There were no what I call concentration plays, a lot of false starts, a couple of holding penalties. You can live with that as long as they're not drive killers. But no personal fouls, no unsportsmanlike penalties. That is a disciplined team that we didn't quite see last year from Colorado last year. So let's take a look at Nebraska and what they did last week. Well, they beat UTEP 40-7, and not a lot to take away from that ball game. Dylan Raiola looked the part as the quarterback, kind of like what we talked about with Nico, going up against an inferior opponent. There, he looked the part. 19 for 27, 238 yards, 2 touchdowns, and very limited action there. Let's take a look at some of their game data and see if we can't kind of foreshadow what may be to come in this matchup. That Nebraska rush defense looked really good in this contest. Only 56 yards rushing on 24 attempts. We talked about the inability for Colorado to run the ball. Well, you're going to be running into a brick wall right here if you try to run against Nebraska the way that Colorado has been running the ball. Really good job by the Nebraska defense, not allowing third down conversions. UTEP was only 3 of 10 in that ball game. Now, we know inferior opponent, but I want you to listen to these numbers and see if you can pick up what I'm putting down here. Nebraska, 47 rush attempts, 223 yards on the ground. Folks, that's shades of their legendary coach, Tom Osborne, when they were winning national championships with a quarterback named Tommy Frazier, manning that offense there. 4.7 yards per carry. If Nebraska's able to ground and pound Colorado in this ball game, you keep Sanders on the sideline. Again, you want to limit possessions. You want to extend drives by converting on third down. What did they do? What did Nebraska's offense do last week? Converted 11 out of 17 on third down. Shedeur Sanders can't rack up passing yards and passing touchdowns, putting points on the board if he's sitting on the sideline. I want to see if head coach Matt Rhule is going to implement this ground and pound strategy. I'm not worried about trying to make Dylan Raiola the story in this ball game. I'm trying to make sure that Shedeur Sanders, Travis Hunter, when he's playing the wide receiver, and all of those fantastic weapons aren't the story at the end of this ball game. How do you do that? You line up and you absolutely run it, and you keep running. We saw a 3-headed monster attack. I think Emmett Johnson had a solid game last week. Ramir Johnson, another solid game. Dante Dowdell had a solid game for Nebraska. If you're looking for a stat in this ball game, I want you to count the rush attempts for Nebraska in the first half. If that number is over 20, we could be in for a get even ball game by Nebraska this year, having that game there in Lincoln. If Nebraska takes the foolhardy strategy of trying to throw as often as they did last week against this Colorado defense, you don't want to get into a scoring contest with Colorado. Their offense is explosive. And whether they're up, whether it's tied or they're losing, they're going to throw the ball against this Nebraska defense because they know they're not going to be able to run it. So really no point in even looking at how Colo- Colorado's rush offense is going to do in this ball game because I don't expect any production from that unit. What I do expect is a passing offense that's going to throw the ball north of 40 plus times in this ball game. It's going to depend on whether they're throwing to catch up or they're throwing to take away one of Nebraska's biggest assets in this ball game, and that's being able to run the ball. You're not going to see a lot of head coaches in college football run the ball when they're losing at at the half. So Nebraska, you wanna make sure that you either are tied or have the lead at the half. That way you can wear down this Colorado defense in the second half. If Nebraska if Nebraska's trying to play catch up, you're now asking a freshman to go throw for throw with a young man who could be potentially the first pick in this upcoming draft. I'm going to highlight a couple of players here in this ballgame. We know about Shedeur Sanders. We know about Travis Hunter. But I'm going to tell you about a wide receiver that I have absolutely loved since he got to Colorado, and that is Jimmy Horn Jr., 5'10" senior out of Sanford, Florida. Familiar with with that area. All he did last week was 7 receptions, 198 yards receiving, 1 touchdown. Did have that long reception of 69 yards. While all the attention, and rightfully so, is going to be on Travis Hunter when he's lined up as a wide receiver, don't forget about Joe Horn Jr. in this matchup. Gonna throw one more skill guide there for you, and that is transfer Will Shepard, 6'3", 205 pounds, out of Madisonville, Louisiana. Limited production last week, only 2 receptions, only 23 yards. But if your attention at Nebraska starts to kind of move all over the place, that young man can absolutely hurt you in this ball game. Going to give you a wide receiver now for Nebraska to watch out for. Isaiah Nayer, 6'4", 220-pound wide receiver there out of the Metroplex in Fort Worth, Texas. Wears the number 18, and he likes to play a physical style wide receiver. So he's not afraid of contact. He's going to line up at the X. He's going to line up occasionally in the slot, looking for those favorable matchups. And you better, if you're Colorado, know where he is at all times. I don't know if I want to put Travis Hunter on him. I would probably employ a different strategy. I would put Travis Hunter on their second wide receiver in Jamal Banks, 6'4", 220-pound wide receiver, and then I'm going to double team Nayer and really force Raiola to now find his third wide receiver in this ball game. I think it's going to be a fantastic matchup. Coach Prime, we're going to hit your theme music at some point during these previews, but this game is going to go a long way to let us know where each of these two programs now, with both coaches in their second year at their most current stop. I think it's going to be a fantastic game. Looking forward to it. And now, our game of the week. And folks, I've been waiting to get to this matchup for a few days now. The Texas Longhorns travel up to Ann Arbor to take on the defending national champ, the Michigan Wolverines. Let's talk about Texas here for a brief moment because we didn't really learn anything from their matchup against Colorado State, 52 ripped in that contest. Quinn Ewers, workmanlike performance as we pull up his numbers here. In very limited action, 20 for 27, 260 yards, almost 10 yards per attempt, 3 touchdowns, 1 INT. We'll talk about the rushing numbers here in just a minute because there's some outline digits in these numbers. 41 rush attempts, 190 yards, 3 rushing touchdowns. We're gonna look at those numbers with a grain of salt there. Same thing with their receivers there. Some nice numbers from the main guys that we need to be looking at. Isaiah Bond, transfer from Alabama. Nice job in his first game there in Austin. 5 receptions, 61 yards, a touchdown. Ryan Wingo, folks, rightfully so. We're talking a lot about the freshman wide receiver there for Ohio State. A lot of conversation about the freshman wide receiver for Alabama and Ron Williams. Cam Coleman there in Auburn. Folks, Ron Wingo looks like he is ready to be in that elite conversation. 6'2", 210-pound freshman out of St. Louis, Missouri. Folks, 4 catches, 70 yards, almost 18 yards per catch. Did have that 30-yard reception there. For Michigan, we learned a little bit more about Michigan in their matchup against Fresno State than we initially thought we would. That score, final score, a little bit misleading as well, 30-10. That was a 10-3 ball game at the end of the first half. Michigan outscores Fresno State 20-7 in the second half, aided by basically a game closer there by one of the best cornerbacks in college football in Will Johnson, 86-yard pick six back to the house there to basically seal a deal there for Michigan. Here's what we learned about Michigan, and folks, it is concerning all the way around. 34 rush attempts, 148 yards, 4.4 yards per attempt. Folks, this offensive line for Michigan this year is not the same as we've seen over the past couple of years, and rightfully so. Those guys are graduated, or a couple are in the NFL right now. So that would be concerning for me if I'm a Michigan fan. We're going to talk about the quarterback production here. 16 for 27, 4.5 yards per pass attempt, 121 yards passing in the ball game. Terrible third down offense, 4 for 11 in this contest. Now, the Michigan defense, we don't have a whole lot of issues with that defense. 22 rush attempts, 9 rushing yards. That's right. 22 attempts, 9 rushing yards. Half a yard per rush attempt. Their pass defense, more than solid. 22 for 36, 235, 6.5 yards per attempt. And we're absolutely able to get off the field on third down. 2 for 11. I've been telling you all summer long, Don Wink Martindale is going to have this defense buttoned up. And they're only going to get better as the season goes. But this offense really concerns me. They do not have an answer at the quarterback position. I've been telling Michigan fans for a year now that Alex Orji is not a quarterback at the Division I level, especially if you're talking about a program like Michigan that has playoff aspirations this coming year. 1 for 2 in the ball game, 3 yards. Good night. We're not talking about that anymore. David Warren, Um, 15 for 25, 118 yards, 4.7 yards per attempt, one touchdown, one INT. The Michigan run game, folks, Donovan Edwards is not a Big Ten running back. I know what he did in the national championship game. Uh, he made one long run in that ball game, and it was because he hit the wrong hole, bounced out of it, found a crease, and went, I think it was 70 plus yards for that long run. If you're talking about being a Big Ten running back, you got to be able to square your pads, drop your shoulders, and get through the hole and pick up those tough yards, 5, 6, 7 yards. Blake Corum is with the LA Chargers now. Whew. Now, what we did like was Khalil Mullins, 6'2", 230-pound running back out of West Roxbury, Mass. Now, he should be the feature back for the University of Michigan. You're talking about 15 carries, 92 yards, 6.1 yards per carry. His longest run was 21 yards. The wide receiver spot for Michigan, it's scary how bad it is right now. Outside of their phenomenal tight end, Colston Loveland, who had 8 receptions, 87 yards, almost 11 yards per reception, had that receiving touchdown. The other 3 wide receivers, we're talking about Tyler Morris, we're talking about Kendrick Bell, and Samarjay Morgan. They combined for 6 receptions. If my math is right, 34 combined yards. If you think that's going to beat the University of Texas in this ball game, it's not. The Michigan defense, like I said, it's going to be spectacular, and we know who they're led by. They're led by those 2 fantastic defensive tackles, Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant. They're going to form a wall, but if I'm Steve Sarkisian, I want to use the run game just to kind of keep Michigan and Don Wink Martindale on their toes. But outside of Will Johnson, you can take away one wide receiver. Can't take away all of them. So I expect Sark to move around these wide receivers and not so much be afraid to throw at Will Johnson, but I ain't gonna make a foolish habit out of it. Because in one play, he can flip this game over and give Michigan 7 easy points. The game script I'm gonna give you, and I got some time to go through it. Let's start with the road team here, Texas. How do the Longhorns win this ball game? Quinn Ewers, play mistake football. It is not going to be a crime or a penalty if you have to punt the ball. Do not force any throws in this ball game. If you take care of the ball and just manage the game, you're going to put your team in excellent position to win. We're projecting Texas to have about let's call it about 220 yards passing in this ball game. It's how you get those yards is what I'm going to be looking at. You don't have to look for the home run. You don't have to look for the deep shot. Just take what the defense gives you and keep the pressure on Michigan as you get points on as many drives as you possibly can. It doesn't matter if it's field goals or touchdowns. I know what you need as far as a point total to win this ball game. Our numbers absolutely are telling us if you can get to if you can get to 30 points in this ball game, Texas, you're coming back home with a 2-0 record and a big time win um, for your program this year. Let's take a look at Michigan. Michigan, your path to victory in this ball game, you're going to have to run the ball. We know that you ran it pretty solidly last week. Um, we still have some question marks about this Texas rush defense without the two big fellows in the middle. Sweat, who now plays for the Tennessee Titans, Byron Murphy is playing on Sundays with the Seattle Seahawks. Michigan, you're going to have to get over 200 yards rushing in this ball game. That is your path to victory because if you're asking your quarterback, Warren, to throw for 250 yards or more in this contest, given what we saw from the wide receiver production, um, that's not going to be the best path for victory for you in this ball game. It has to be about the rushing yards. 227 is the number that you absolutely have to get to. You got to shorten this game up quite a bit in this contest. In our final moments, we're going to give you our best bet of the weekend. And I thought long and hard about where we would go for the best bet. A lot of great games on the menu. But this is one we had in pocket as soon as the lines were released. And we're going to head to I'm debating now which game I want to give here. Let's do it here. Let's go with Rock Chalk Jayhawk KU in their battle, their border war with Illinois in this ball game. Kansas opened as a 5.5 point favorite. That line is still sitting. Wait a minute. Let me get that updated number here. As we're recording, yes, that line is still sitting there with the Jayhawks as a 5.5 point favorite. Folks, I expect that line to go to 6 here really quickly. And I think Kansas, who absolutely looked the part last week, will be able to beat an Illinois team that, quite frankly, kind of struggled. So since we have a few extra minutes, I can actually do a quick preview of this game and really kind of shed some light on why this is our best bet. So little bonus preview here on the podcast. So Kansas last week against FCS opponent Lindenwood, 48-3 in that ball game. And the only reason I'm pointing that out is because quarterback Jalen Daniels, 6 foot, 200-pound quarterback who has been having back issues for the past couple of seasons, so hasn't been able to get through a full season healthy. Only had to play very limited action in that ball game, 9 for 15, 148 yards. Not worried about that, but they were able to get him out of the ball game without any injuries. And folks, I can tell you, I love their running back there in Devin Neal. 5'11", 215-pound running back right there in his hometown of Lawrence, Kansas. Expect him to have a very nice ball game coming up. What we saw from Illinois in their win last week, 45-0 against Eastern Illinois. And in that contest, Luke Altmaier, former Ole Miss quarterback, had a phenomenal game in that contest. 11 for 24. I'm sorry, 19 for 24, 213 yards passing. Did have 4 touchdowns. I expect him to have a much more difficult time in this contest going up against Kansas. Can Illinois keep up the scoring with Kansas in this ball game? Is what I would be concerned with in this matchup. A couple of quick facts and figures in this ball game. Illinois hasn't beaten a non-conference team. I'm sorry, let me back up and redo that. Illinois has not beaten a ranked non-conference team since beating number 22 Arizona State, and we got to go back all the way to 2011. This is the first trip by the Kansas Jayhawks to Illinois since 1968. Usually this is a neutral site game there, so their first matchups. Luke Altmaier is the first Illinois quarterback to have back-to-back games with 3 or more touchdowns since Brandon Peters back in 2019. Illinois' shutout of Eastern Illinois was its first in a season opener since 1986 against Louisville, winning that ball game 23-0. After going 2-10 in 2021. Kansas head coach Lance Leipold, first year there in Lawrence. The Jayhawks are 16-11. The Jayhawks were 9-4 last year for most wins in a season since going 12-1 in 2007 under the Fighting Manginos there. So some really nice nuggets there for Kansas versus Illinois. Like I said, our best bet will be the Kansas Jayhawks winning by 5.5 in this upcoming game against the Illinois Fighting Illini. I want to thank you for listening to this podcast. If you're watching the replay on Saturday morning on YouTube, streaming on Twitter, I want to thank you as well. You can also catch us weekly on iTunes or Spotify as well. On behalf of my fantastic team, our lovely co-host Summer, Jessica, who does a fantastic job getting us all of the latest weather information, and Billy, who does a fantastic job as our senior analyst getting all of the lines set up. This is Kenneth getting ready to sign off for the Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network. Have a great rest of your week. We got NFL action starting this week as well, but enjoy week 2 of the NFL season. We'll be back with you soon, getting ready for week 3 of the college football season. Have a great night, everybody, and as always, God bless.